Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Daniel Potts. I'm a neurologist from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the VA and also at the University of Alabama. And it's my pleasure, along with our other BATL faculty, to welcome you to Bringing Art to Life. We are very thrilled that you are taking part in this program, sponsored by Cognitive Dynamics Foundation. And we hope that your time in Bringing Art to Life is going to be a very special time of learning, of growth and of transformation, and of forming new relationships. Um, it's my pleasure to talk to you today in a lecture format a little bit about the history of bringing art to life, my dad's story, a little bit about memory, and a little bit about art therapy and sort of a philosophy of why we've structured bringing art to life the way we have. And I want to share some things with you via PowerPoint, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now with you. Um, Bringing Art to Life is a program that was started in the year 2010 when we got our foundation started, Cognitive Dynamics, a 501c3 foundation that was started really in memory of my father, Lester, whom you see on this first slide. And the program was sort of the flagship for that foundation. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in the course of this lecture. I've entitled this, An Introduction to Bringing Art to Life, a program from Cognitive Dynamics Foundation. We're going to talk about living well in dementia through art, reminiscence, storytelling, and relationships. Some objectives for this talk are to describe benefits of art, creativity, and connection in the life of my father, Lester, both in terms of his personhood and also his narrative and through the relationships that he formed as part of the care that he received after his diagnosis, to discuss the neuroscience of memory and highlight some changes in memory associated with Alzheimer's disease, to explore artistic engagement in persons that are living with Alzheimer's and other cognitive conditions, and talk about creativity's effects on memory, personhood, narrative, specifically highlighting the role of art therapy, to discuss some of the benefits of expressive arts and creativity in persons with cognitive impairment, to describe BATL, which is, as we said, was inspired by my dad, and also talk a little bit about some research and testimonials that we've garnered in 11 years of doing the program, and to really celebrate the fact that nothing, not even dementia, can steal our identity and our capacity for relationships. By way of some disclosures, I do some gratis work in consulting for Embodied Labs in terms of their virtual reality programming, which you'll experience as part of Bringing Art to Life. And also, as we've mentioned, we formed Cognitive Dynamics, which is a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. And with my wife, I have formed a dementia education company and also written a book for caregivers. The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away, said Pablo Picasso. Lester Potts, that you see here, was my father. He was a good man. He grew up at the tail end of the Great Depression and lived a Great Depression work ethic. He was a U.S. Army veteran, a community leader, and a great father and husband, and just a good guy. I never thought about my dad having to struggle with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, but then again, no one is in a position to predict that. And so he did have that condition, but you know what emerged was the person of Lester, really not the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So it was a transcendent type thing for Dad, because really he had found his gift, and really the greatest gift I think he was able to give, actually, he gave through the condition Alzheimer's that he had. One of the things that, well, I guess the most important thing that enabled Dad to express his gift, even though he had Alzheimer's, was the fact that he was surrounded by wonderful friends at Caring Days Adult Daycare, which is an adult dementia daycare program in Tuscaloosa, that Dad was fortunate enough to be able to attend. While there, he was exposed to many, many things, including music and art and literature and drama and movement and dance and all of those expressive arts that we talk about now. And it really changed Dad's life. Dad received the diagnosis of Alzheimer's about the age of 70, and he had shown some signs before that, but officially was diagnosed at about that time. And he really struggled with it. He was a very capable guy, able to do things, repair things, was good with his hands, was a good communicator, and he began to lose those things. Of course, first of all, short-term memory, but the other things like language deficits and the ability to use his hands well and to be a handyman like he had been accustomed to. That was a struggle, and he struggled with that and became depressed about that. It was difficult for my mother, a very capable, strong man living there at the house, unable to do the things that he was accustomed to doing. And so along came Caring Days, which was really a savior for us at the time. I had felt like I had let my dad and mother down because I had either been in denial about or had not noticed some of the early signs that Dad had. I was so close to him, and I chalked them up to a surgery that he had had and a move that he'd had, when in fact it was Alzheimer's beginning to manifest itself. But that being as it may, we did the best we can to navigate down this path. But Caring Days was very important because they validated my dad in his current state, and they loved the guy that they saw coming through the door every day. I was trained as a neurologist and trained to see loss and deficit and struggle and those sorts of things to try to correct those things. But at Caring Days, they accepted the Lester they saw and validated him. And my dad had never painted a picture that I knew of until he got to Caring Days, and he met a watercolor artist there, not an art therapist, but just a guy who wanted to share his gifts. And so Dad found a talent for watercolor art, and he painted over 100 watercolors while at Caring Days over about 3-4 years. And through those watercolors, he painted his life story. We're going to talk a little bit about Dad's art now. One of the things that was so important for Dad, probably the most important thing, I guess, was to get his story out through art. This was at a time when he couldn't tell a story anymore because he didn't have the words to, but he certainly could paint it with the tools that he was given. And so early life memories came out in the art. You see in the top left corner of this slide, my dad with some birdhouses. Dad loved to build birdhouses for community members and for his friends. And he was good at it, and he loved to put them up for folks. That was one way he gave back. Well, after Dad started painting, you can see that there are birdhouses noted in this late stage Alzheimer's art. A birdhouse motif in these two paintings that kept cropping up. This art demonstrates perseveration, so repeating of themes. Don't know exactly why he did that. Part of it was disease, but part of it's probably because it made him feel good to paint these birdhouses. And so he continued to do that. Another thing that Dad loved was fences. He built many fences in his life. You can see him in the 1930s with his family around the fence at the farmhouse. And you can see some other fences that Dad painted in his watercolor painting days. This is a story that I really love, a story within a story. One of Dad's best friends growing up was Albert Corder, seen in this photo, an African-American man that worked in the sawmill where my dad grew up. And they worked together. They were friends, brothers, and they continued to be that all their lives. And so late in Dad's life, when he was still painting but couldn't talk very well, he painted this watercolor, which our family knew was Albert and Dad. We asked Dad who that was in the painting, and he just put his hand on Albert, didn't say anything. And I said, "Dad, is that Mr. Albert?" And he cried because that relationship was still very important to Dad, even though he had Alzheimer's. And so he continued to, I'm sure, rely on that and find comfort in that and find familiarity in that relationship. one of the important things to note here is that relationships and those things of greatest value to a human being remain inside. The long-term memories associated with those relationships and those greatest values and those familiar things remain inside a person and can actually be accessed in many cases through the expressive arts. This is Dad's most well-known painting. We call it the Blue Collage. And in this blue collage, painted in late-stage Alzheimer's, one can find many images from Dad's early childhood and early life. And I'm going to change slides here so that you can see some arrows that I've drawn to particular elements in this painting. You see in the center of the painting what looks like a cross-cut saw with a handle on it coming out of a high-top shoe with a cross on it on which appears a hat. We feel that like that is an abstract image of Dad's father, whom you see in the images to the side here with his hat and his high-top shoes, and also my dad's father and mother down at the bottom. They instilled a sense of faith in him, a sense of hard work, and Dad is depicting that in an image there. You also see birdhouses, and you see trees, you see leaves, fences, saws, and this is like a painting of Dad's life, or like a painting of Lester in abstract. Again, drawing off those early images. Well, Dad's art really sort of began to work on me as well, because I was struggling through this as a neurologist, an only child. I did not feel I had the tools as a caregiver to help my mother with the day-to-day caregiving activities that were required, because we didn't learn that kind of thing in med school and in residency. We learned a lot about dementia and Alzheimer's and the science of it, and the pharmacotherapies that are used to treat some of the symptoms, but we didn't learn much about the day-to-day caregiving. So I felt I was struggling, and I felt sort of inadequate to the task. But one of the things that Dad's art did for me is it helped me to discover my own art. So I started writing poetry based on the themes that I saw in my dad's paintings. And so this really sort of helped me through some very dark times around my dad's diagnosis, and even thereafter. In fact, I still write poetry today, and have written over 1,500 poems since I started writing. And it really it gives me an outlet and a way to process through emotions, and I really love doing it. One of the things that we did while Dad was still living is that we paired some of Dad's poems and some of Dad's paintings and some of my poems in a book called The Broken Jar, and we gave it back to Caring Days. The American Academy of Neurology found out about this book and story, and asked me to be an advocate in training to learn how to advocate for our neurologic patients, for their caregivers, and also for our profession. And I'll touch on that in a couple of more slides. One of the things that also came out of this time with Dad was that my wife and I wrote a book together called A Pocket Guide for the Alzheimer's Caregiver. Ellen and I, in combination, have had 8 family members living with some sort of dementia. She has more than I, and she was a childhood caregiver. But we realized that there were some gaps in our knowledge, and so afterwards we said, you know what, let's write a compact book of helpful information, and we did that. And that was one of the things that we did prior to, or actually after, the advocacy training program that I went through with my friend Neelam Agarwal, who you see right here, who you know well. So Dr. Agarwal and I both went through this advocacy training program from the AAN, American Academy of Neurology, and it helped us to sort of develop action plans through which to make our advocacy more effective. Advocacy means pleading the cause of another, and we are pleading the causes of our patients, their caregivers, our profession, and others. I appreciated getting to meet Dr. Agarwal at that event, and then we've continued to work together thereafter. In fact, that's how Bringing Art to Life Chicago has gotten started, because Dr. Agarwal reached out and said, you know, we've been wanting to work together. There's a need for this in our community, and why don't we do that? So we got started in 2016 on Bringing Art to Life Chicago. It's been a joy to work with Dr. Agarwal. We had one other event that was important in the formation of our program, and that was an art show in Beverly Hills of Dad's art. called Painting in Twilight, An Artist's Escape from Alzheimer's back in 2010. That was the flagship program for our foundation to be unveiled. And so with all of those events and that backdrop, we did create Bringing Art to Life. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I want to come back really quickly to Dad's art and some of the characteristics of Dad's art, and also the art of another artist, a famous artist actually, William Utemolan, who had Alzheimer's just like Dad did. Artist Utemolan used to paint portraits of himself yearly, de novo. In other words, he wasn't looking at the previous portrait, he was just painting a portrait. You can see in the far left here of the PowerPoint an image that he painted before he had Alzheimer's disease. And then, of course, you can see images that he painted as he entered into the diagnosis. And I find it really very powerful, as I'm sure you do as well, to look at these images that this man painted. Just incredible, just incredible imagery. Words are inadequate to describe this. But Dr. Anjan Chatterjee in his lab did an analysis of the paintings of Lester Potts and of William Utemolan to try to see if there were characteristic features of this art. It turns out that there are. Both of the artists became more abstract and symbolic as the disease progressed. They displayed less precision and attention to spatial relationships, and they were less depictively accurate and less realistic. The paintings of Dad also showed more color saturation, warmer hues. If you'll notice, he painted with a lot of greens and blues and purples, less complexity, and actually less emotional expression as the disease went on. The widow of artist Utemolan made some really cogent points about his art that she observed. She talked about his art being a way of addressing his fears and exploring his altered self. The diagnosis necessitated him finding new tools and even a new style, but the great talent still remained. The method changed. So this is evidence of the fact that he continued to want to paint, and he continued to paint despite the diagnosis. Now I'd like to move a little bit into memory, kind of the neuroscience of memory, which is important for what we are talking about here. Memory is the process of acquiring new information, the outcome of which is memory. I mean, so we're talking about learning being the process of acquiring new information, and the outcome of learning is memory. I love this quote from Lisa Genova. It is through the erosion of memory that time heals all wounds. So actually, forgetting can be very important in our lives in some instances. Unfortunately, it can also be quite a challenge if we have dementia. Art is an appeal against vanishing, says Lynn Castile Harper, which I find is also a beautiful quote. There's several types of memory, you may know. There's very brief sensory memory, which consists of milliseconds of information that we're taking in from all of our senses all the time, some of which we hang on to and some of which we don't. There's short-term or working memory, which is seconds to minutes, which consists of the memories that we take in and work with. So the important things that we need to process through and hang on to live our daily lives. And some of that goes into long-term memory. So long-term memory is years to decades to lifelong. There are two types of long-term memory, explicit and implicit. Explicit memory is declarative memory and consists of semantic and episodic memory. Semantic is the conscious memory of learned facts, and episodic memory is experienced events. Then implicit or non-declarative memory is non-conscious memory that can't be recalled verbally, but it's often expressed through the performance of procedures. And we also call a part of this procedural memory. So like learning how to, or remembering how to ride a bike. So how do we make memories? Well, we have all the sensory information coming in, so we have to claim some of it and store it. So the processes that we go through to do this are encoding, consolidation, storage, and retrieval. That is the process of laying down memory and recalling memory. In coding, we have all this sensory information that's been perceived and paid attention to, and that's translated into a neural language. And that neural language is then consolidated into a single web of connections and stored in multiple different parts of the brain. It then can be retrieved and reactivated, recalled, and recognized at a later time. The primary brain regions for memory are seen here. These are not all of them, but these are some of the most important. The first and most important is the hippocampus, which we call the memory weaver or the save button for the brain. So this weaves the who, what, where, when, and why of sensory information into a retrievable unit of associated data, which we call memory. The hippocampus then activates regions destined for long-term memory until they are wired into this web and the pattern becomes stable and connected. And it's also involved in spatial or navigational learning. So remember, the memory weaver or the save button is the hippocampus, so called because it looks like a seahorse, and it's located in the middle temporal lobes, the inside of the temporal lobes bilaterally. The prefrontal cortex is attendant to the present moment. It's involved in working memory, and it has a limited space for sight, sound, smells, taste, language, and emotions. It holds 7 plus or minus 2 items for about 15 to 30 seconds. The amygdala, which is involved in processing emotions, especially fear, is activated by emotion or surprise, and it alerts the hippocampus to important information coming in that it needs to save. Meaning matters. So we remember things that are meaningful to us, that are surprising to us, that are emotionally charged for us, that are significant. We also perceive and attend things, and because we perceive and attend them, they're more likely to be remembered. When we remember something over and over again, which I find is very fascinating, we are remembering the last time we remembered it, not the first time it was remembered. So in other words, we are feeding off the last pathway that was activated. So we lay down memory 1.0, memory 2.0, memory 3.0, et cetera, when we're thinking about an event. The hippocampus saves and consolidates significant items in working memory to form long-term memories. Now, the autobiographical memory, which is something we tap into in bringing art to life, is a life story that is made up of the most meaningful memories that we have in our lives. The reminiscence bump is important episodic memories specifically from ages maybe 15 to 30, and we access those a lot through the expressive arts. The hippocampus binds these memories together and the reputations of events that are distributed throughout the cerebral cortex, and they're bound together in the medial temporal lobe. They're consolidated, and then after the hippocampus does its consolidation, it's no longer required for us to call up the long-term memories, so we don't have to access that region of the brain, which is interesting because that's the region of the brain that's severely damaged early in Alzheimer's disease and some other dementias, but especially Alzheimer's. Now, the context in which we learn the information becomes part of the memory, so that if we activate any part of this memory later, we can trigger retrieval of other parts of the memory. So in other words, if the context of a memory matches even decades later the original memory, then we're more likely to be able to remember it. So if we create a context of familiarity, a context of beauty, a context of relationship in bringing art to life, then our participants are more likely to remember some of these early life events that were associated with those particular things. Remembering is reactivating, reconsolidating, rewriting, and resaving on top of the old memory. Rehearsing is important for us to be able to remember. Sleep saves new memories, so it's very important to get our sleep. Sleep also cleans out trash in the brain. So some of the amyloid that builds up in Alzheimer's disease is cleaned out when we sleep. The two primary ways of resisting forgetting are repetition and adding meaning to what we remember. Recalling life's most meaningful details, which is autobiographical memory, bolsters a sense of self, a narrative, and growth in relationships with others. And very importantly for our purposes, expressive arts access autobiographical memory. So the memory loss that's associated with Alzheimer's disease really starts with episodic memory decline. So we are not able to consolidate new memories and send them to where they need to be because the hippocampus is being affected by the pathology of Alzheimer's. You can see in these MRI images that on the right side, we have a normal aged brain. The hippocampus, which is in the mesial temporal lobes, we're looking right straight into the head here. And so we see toward the center of the picture in the bottom of the brain, two little sort of seahorse-shaped organs there, the hippocampus. You can see them big and healthy on the right, but you don't see them on the left very much because that person has Alzheimer's. In fact, you can also see a lot of other atrophy or shrinkage of the brain in that picture. Episodic memory declines early on. Next goes semantic memory. So object naming, verbal fluency, categorization abilities decrease. And then working memory declines later. And the extent of atrophy in the mesial temporal lobe correlates to the deficits that we have in memory. So as we move into the final portion of this talk, I want to talk a little bit about art. I love this quote from Virgil from the One World Center where 9/11 occurred. "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." And so we begin to think of memory more as a collective entity, even perhaps than an individual entity. So we remember for each other. Art helps us to remember and to hold each other's stories. Creativity is chocolate for the brain, said Dr. Gene Cohen, who is a geriatric psychiatrist who did a lot of studies looking at creativity and health. So what does art do? Why is it beneficial? Well, it facilitates the development of visuospatial skills, which can be lost and are lost often in Alzheimer's disease. It increases one's ability to create abstractions and to process concepts in abstract. It helps to lessen brain effects of stress. It helps to preserve patience, attention, and self-regulation. Art makes connections between unrelated things and fosters communication. It activates the pleasure centers of the brain, and it engenders a flow state, that state we go into when we are so focused on our present moment that time seems to stand still. Brain regions that are involved with art making and art viewing tend to be all of the brain regions. And so that's why I've highlighted everything on this painting. Literally, almost every part of the brain is involved in creating art, viewing art, processing art. Artistic engagement in dementia is particularly important. It can provide meaning for persons with dementia. It helps to connect them to their culture and community. People with Alzheimer's and other dementias have an innate openness to art that is recognized through this engagement. And short-term memory is really not required for them to be able to engage art. The expressive arts engage the brain in a more profound way than most other activities. The arts link separate brain regions together, and they bypass single location deficits, like if somebody has a deficit in memory or language. Dementia doesn't dampen the desire to create, as we saw with William Utemolan. There are two streams through which we process and create visual art: the dorsal stream, which is the where stream, and the ventral stream, which is the what stream. So the dorsal stream is important for locating objects in space, for movement of scenes, for spatial transformation, and for spatial relationships. The ventral stream, or the what stream, is more important for color, texture, pictorial details, shape, and size. When we are viewing, processing, and creating visual art, we potentially fire off the same neurons that the artist did when they were creating the art. So the occipital lobe takes note of separate visual features and stores them separately. And then the parietal lobe organizes those features in the dorsal stream. And then meaningful scene creation or organization occurs usually in the right temporal lobe, the ventral stream, where visual prototypes are formed. Things that we can recognize later. So we form a prototype of a mountain scene. Then the next time we see a mountain scene, we can recognize it as being a mountain scene. The right hemisphere tends to live in the moment. And the left hemisphere tends to analyze what it is that we are experiencing with language. This is a functional MRI of folks that are both producing visual art and evaluating visual art. And you can see that the brain's activity and its utilization of glucose tends to go up when we are both processing and viewing or creating actually visual art. Art, memory, selfhood, and narrative. So philosopher Soren Kierkegaard felt that art was very important in forming our life story and our sense of self. Humans, he said, seek coherence by turning inward and working on this thing we call a self, this thing we call a person. The self is indeed a work of art in and of itself. Life narrative and story determines our identity. Some unity of inwardness is required to make sense of our life narrative and our life story, and art and creativity can help to provide that unity. Art matters primarily because it assists in the process of selfhood, the project of selfhood, and the shaping of life story and narrative. Art is indeed a mirror for life, and the function of art in people living with dementia may be particularly important because some of them are having trouble hanging on to their selfhood, their personhood. So art therapy comes in to play here, and it really is quite important, and it is well structured to do the things that we feel aid in quality of life and living, helping patients to live well. Art therapy is an integrative mental health human services profession that enriches lives and communities through art making, creative process, applied psychological theory, human experience within a psychotherapeutic relationship. Art therapy supports meaning and bypasses verbal aspects of brain function, which aids in communication. Art therapy can provide a means of expressing emotion and bolstering self-image. Art therapy can assist in accessing autobiographical memory, and it tends to synthesize and integrate psychological, emotional, and cognitive functions, which also leads to well-being and resiliency. Art therapy is important for neuroplasticity, the forming of the neuronal connections and new neurons in brain regions that contribute to psychological well-being. So this plasticity is important in building human resiliency. Art therapy, through its relational aspects, can activate and mend attachment wounds that have occurred early on in life. So these attachment wounds or these traumas that we all have to undergo in our lives can feed emotional reactivity later in life, and can be sources of some of the emotional reactivity that we see in people living with dementia, and also some of the behaviors that are talked about, which are really normal human behaviors, but for someone that has been traumatized or that cannot deal effectively with their early life experiences, they can become sort of hard to deal with. Art therapy can facilitate the creation of a new and meaningful narrative involving negative or traumatic memories, which can result in a transformed sense of self and an updated autobiographical memory. The right hemisphere tends to hold nonverbal material and nonverbal autobiographical memories, and the left hemisphere tends to integrate them with a verbal story. The right hemisphere is thought to primarily also hold the emotional, social self and the interpersonal sense of self. Those are in the orbitofrontal region of the brain, or that area is in the orbitofrontal region of the brain. And image making really directly accesses this area of the brain. Brain regions that are associated with the social emotional self are thought to be less adversely affected by Alzheimer's pathology, and therefore more resistant and more amenable to activation through the process of art therapy. Music and other color and sensory stimuli can also provide a gateway to the right hemisphere, as can movement and color. So we can see that any of the expressive arts are very good at accessing and tapping into the sense of self. Recollection of early memories is associated with aspects of well-being. So it builds self-esteem for people to remember their early memories, and it builds a sense of self-control and a sense of mastery. Memories from early childhood and adolescence may present as standalone visual images and stories. And when these come out during the process of art therapy, if there is a compassionate listener, which can be a memory holder for our participants, which you will be, then it's more likely that we can process through these memories and that a transformed life story can grow out of this. So it's important for you, the compassionate listener, to be there alongside the person living with dementia who is struggling through as best they can, and all the while getting their life story out. And these are important pieces that you can sort of help them put back together in a new story. And the art really helps us to do that. So persons with dementia have an interior subjective world. They are overwhelmed often with their loss of their sense of self, but this can give voice to the inner world. So in other words, art can give voice to this inner world. When disability limits language, images become very significant. And this you will discover again and again in bringing art to life. All paths lead to the same goal, to convey to others what we are, says Pablo. Expressive arts therapies improve quality of life and enhance perceived self-worth and promote human dignity. And we're talking about all of those therapies. Expressive arts can improve a person's ability to communicate their story, can stimulate memory, foster community, promote positive relationships, help address underlying behaviors, enhance cognitive abilities temporarily, and elevate and stabilize mood, thereby enlivening a sense of self-worth and fostering dignity. Dr. Gene Cohen, who we talked about earlier, did a large study of the creativity and aging study, which looked at arts and creativity in people over 65, and it's been in the benefits of participating in those. And you see here that physical health improved, the number of doctor visits decreased, medication usage decreased, depression indices fell, increased morale was noted, and increased physical activity was noted. Creativity reinforces neuronal connections, as we've talked about, and improves emotional resiliency, increasing a sense of well-being and improving memory. There was a study done at the Mayo Clinic looking at people in their 80s who engaged in artistic activities such as painting, drawing, and sculpting, both in midlife and later in life. And those individuals had a lower risk of mild cognitive impairment development. Arts in healthcare is the use of art or creativity in healthcare, not facilitated by a therapist. Arts therapies are facilitated by trained and credentialed therapists, and they work with people in a defined clinical relationship. And you'll be seeing that in the art therapy that you see and that you experience in Bringing Art to Life. And lastly, I'll finish up with some images from Bringing Art to Life from 2011 to present. And we started it back then. We wanted to facilitate a dignifying experience for people living with dementia and their families. We wanted to preserve their life stories. We wanted to educate students. We wanted to facilitate intergenerational relationships. And we wanted to showcase those life stories in art. And our creed is that each person has innate value and dignity, despite conditions or circumstances. Personhood is inherent and unfading, despite any inability of ours to perceive it. And we honestly believe that. And it really colors everything we do. So you'll get to experience embodied labs and the virtual reality modules that they have, which help to build empathy in our students and in all of us. You'll get to participate in art therapy directives. Angel Duncan is seen here. She's our executive arts director for cognitive dynamics, whom you've met in the gallery facilitation and art therapy facilitated directives. We also practice mindfulness and simply being present in the moment. This is very, very important for the success of Bringing Art to Life. You show up, mind, body, and spirit, you're engaged, you listen, and you're fully attentive. We also listen to first-person accounts of dementia from people that are actually living with the condition, like Dr. Cynthia Hewling-Hummel and Brian LeBlanc, seen in this painting, in these photos. So anytime we can, we try to listen to the actual experience of persons that are living with these conditions so that we can have better empathy for them. Of course, we have music. You can see here some of our music in Tuscaloosa that we have, because that facilitates the whole environment. In Tuscaloosa, we use a lot of technology, lifebio.com, and we build a legacy book for the life stories of our individuals, in which we put their paintings, student writings, letters from their family, etc. And you'll be doing something like that. We've done scrapbooks, we've done shutterfly books, we've done we've done DVDs. Really, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we preserve the life stories of these folks. This is some of the art that has been created in Bringing Art to Life. And these are some of the folks that have been in Bringing Art to Life, and some of the wonderful moments that we have. You'll have those too, about which you can talk for many years to come, that will hopefully enrich your lives as well. We've done research on Bringing Art to Life at the University of Alabama, and we have found that measures of empathy are increased, and there are improved attitudes toward older adults and persons living with dementia in our students. This is validated information. Existential awareness fosters mindfulness and empathy in our students, and engagement with the present moment with group members in an art therapy setting brings meaningful engagement. And it's actually more so the intergenerational relationships that are meaningful than the actual production of any art. It's the relational experience that is very important. BATL students had improved attitudes toward individuals living with dementia, and there was less stigma associated with the condition. We also found that morning sessions tend to work better, and that there is significantly more verbal and social engagement than there is activity-related engagement. Two of the themes that keep coming up in these engagement, in the engagement piece of Bringing Art to Life, are validation of the personhood of our individuals and reminiscence of family ties. These are some images from Bringing Art to Life Chicago, from our first group and also our second group, and some of the sensory garden activities that CMSS has been so good to facilitate at their facility. We also have Bringing Art to Life in Birmingham, Alabama, and here's some images of that from an adult day program there. We have a program called Art to Life Outreach, which sends individual students to work with individual people living at home with dementia or living in facilities with dementia, and doing some of the same activities that we talk about doing here. And we also have started a memory cafe. We've had to not do this during the pandemic, of course, but we plan to meet monthly in the spring and give people living with dementia and their care partners a safe place to interact and have some fun together. In closing, this is a picture of August Dieter. She was the first person who probably was diagnosed with what later became Alzheimer's disease by Dr. Alzheimer himself. She was quoted as saying, "I have lost myself." But you and I can help. We can search for the person who is still alive behind the face, and we can help her find herself again. And you'll be able to do that with your people that are living with dementia that you work with. The choice is ours. Will we heed the call? Yes, we will heed the call, because we're all in Bringing Art to Life together. So I'll close with this image. This was some coffee filter art we did with watercolors, and we love this activity. And we were just having a great big time, and everybody was laughing and cutting up. And one of our participants was doing the same thing and being silly. And lo and behold, in the middle of the art where she traced her hand, she wrote the words, "Help me," which is a reminder to us all that this is a struggle, that people need our help, and that you and I can be there to help them by being present and being in the moment and creating art together in stories. So in summary, the expressive arts therapies and creativity have well-documented benefits in the elderly and folks living with dementia. Nothing can steal our identity. Life's about relationships, even in dementia. We can mindfully connect with people who are living with dementia despite the cognitive impairment. The neuroscience of memory reveals a complex, multimodal, multi-pathway neuroplastic system that integrates diverse brain regions and promotes not only human surviving and thriving, but also the expression of selfhood and the making of meaning in personal, social, and cultural contexts. We talked about the memory changes associated with Alzheimer's. And we also need to mention that for persons living with Alzheimer's and other dementias, the making of meaning the bolstering of selfhood, the expression of emotion, the facilitation of communication, the recollection of narrative, the generation of mindfulness and flow, and the preservation of relationships are among the most important effects of engagement in art and creativity. Bringing Art to Life is an empathy building, dignity preserving program that helps people with dementia to live well. These are some sources that I hope you can further use to learn about this material. And it has been my pleasure to speak to you today. Have a great time in bringing art to life.